Never before has something so old been so hot. What up, squad? Glad you joined me for today's show. Thrilled to have you. We're not going to waste any time getting into bottled in bond because we've got a lot to cover on this topic. I mean, loads. I'm sure all of you have come across the words bottled in bond on a whiskey bottle before. Why else would you be searching for a YouTube video or clicking on a thumbnail that says something about bottled in bond? You've heard the words. And bourbon geeks for a long time have been aware of bottled in bond. We generally know what it is, what it means for whiskey to be bottled in bond. But there's been enough growth over the past few years in the bourbon scene that there's probably a lot of bourbon enthusiasts out there who don't really know what bottled in bond means. Does it have something to do with bonded? No, it has nothing to do with 50 Shades of Grey. It has everything to do with what goes into making the whiskey. So today, we are out to answer the question, what's the deal with bottled in bond? Why does it matter? Why does it matter? We're going to talk about it. First, what is this expression? What is, if I see on this bottle, these words, bottled in bond? Well, it's a government designation. The government has declared this particular product to be bottled in bond. It really means that they've supervised it and it meets the expectations of what they've designated to be bottled in bond spirits. The bottled in bond designation started with the Bottled in Bond Act of 1897. Now hang with me because you might be checking out already. Like most of us probably don't care too much about government legislation, but the Bottled in Bond Act, it's kind of important. It certainly was important. Why does this particular piece of governmental legislation matter to us? Well, let's go back to 1897, like a billion years ago. And let's picture what that was like. I mean, this was before civil rights, before women's suffrage. This was before prohibition. Like people are just getting over the idea that you can bleed somebody with leeches in order to help them feel better. It's old. Like Babe Ruth was born 2 years before 1897. People still thought smoking was healthy. So, like a lot of not great information and not easy. It was not easy for people to access information at this time. Newspapers. Like you had to buy from the kid, the newsies, that whole thing. Those kind of days. That's what we're talking about here. But people still drank whiskey. Unfortunately, they didn't know what kind of whiskey they were drinking. They weren't aware of what was in the bottle. In the midst of all the cultural not knowings, people were just generally unaware of what was in their whiskey bottle. And the stories of what people bottled as bourbon are well documented. All kinds of unsavory things. Like you imagine some yucky stuff that looks like whiskey in a whiskey bottle and people tried to sell it. They mix in alcohol with all kinds of byproducts. And people drank that. Like this was before Reddit and Facebook and Twitter. Like these organizations and these forums that we know are bastions of truth that we can get dependable information from. Wait. Well, anyway, there wasn't a digital form of accountability. Like there was no way that the general consumer could, go on Yelp or the Better Business Bureau and go like, oh wait, these people, this whiskey is not as good as the other guys. Oh, so they just bought whiskey, and sometimes they did it for medicinal purposes. And again, there were producers out there who weren't just aging White Dog or Spirit in barrels. They were taking alcohol and mixing it with crap and selling it, and that would have unfortunate side effects for some people. It wasn't uncommon for people to sometimes drink this, what we would call rectified whiskey, sort of made up whiskey, and get sick or become immortality challenged. So not a great season for whiskey which is still, going through its growing pains, longing for better days. But that brings us then to 1897. All this is going on, and we have to ask the question now, in that milieu, in that situation, with those vibes, why was the Bottled in Bond Act of 1897 passed? Well, like a fortunate byproduct is that like people didn't die when they drank whiskey anymore. But I do think it actually started primarily, like it was money oriented, like money and taxes. That's why a lot of things happen. There's a chance Colonel Taylor and his squad were just benevolent at heart. Like I hope, but they also had a lot of money at stake. So there were some people who were cranking out dope whiskey. They were, distilling probably decently as best they knew how, and aging that distilled spirit in new white oak barrels and making bourbon that tasted good. And they needed a way to differentiate their stuff from the crap. Like they're losing market share to these people who can manufacture rectified whiskey cheaper than they can make the good whiskey. And so they're selling that. And then there's also probably, they're getting a black eye probably from the rectified whiskey people too, because it's like bourbon in general is just like, oh, what am I getting? When there's actually good bourbon out there, but then there's a lot of rectified whiskey. And as a consumer, you can't really tell the difference until the Bottled in Bond Act of 1897. So that's going to help our good whiskey manufacturers be able to differentiate their product, protect their market share, and protect the consumer impression of their brand. So it's marketing. It started as marketing, which is not bad. Marketing is not bad. So then a squad of whiskey producers led by Colonel Edmund Hayes Taylor, E.H. Taylor, partnered with Secretary of Treasury John Carlyle. Don't fault me for looking over. Like, I can't remember all this off the top of my head. Secretary of Treasury John Carlyle, which I do know that was actually one of the last things John Carlyle did as Secretary of Treasury. Poor guy, his career didn't end well. I mean, this act was cool, but read his story. It's kind of a sad ending. Anyway, they all work together and they get this bill passed through Congress, the Bottled in Bond Act of 1897. And it outlined what it meant for a spirit to be bottled in bond. So now what does that mean? What does it mean that, all of these are all, well, these three are bourbons and this is a rye. What does it mean that these whiskeys are bottled in bond? There's 7 things that a spirit has to do, or that a distillery has to do in order to qualify whatever spirit they want to release as bottled in bond as that designation. First one is that the product has to be distilled within one distillation season, meaning that you can't distill from February 2014 and from March of 2016 and then blend those products together in 2021 and then release them as bottled in bond. You can't do that. So it has to be from sort of one distilling session. And these seasons generally, I think it's January to June and then July to December. So spring and fall distillation seasons can only be a product of one of those distillation seasons. Second thing, must be the product of one distiller at one distillery. So it means you're not blending products from Jim Beam and Heaven Hill and calling it bottled in bond. No, it's saying it's from one producer. So no blends in bottled in bond. Number 3, government's got to have his eyes on it. This is one of the reasons why I think the Bottled in Bond Act got passed, is that it actually allowed the government to keep better track on all of the distillation and the bottling that was happening. Because, we're all pretty aware in and around Prohibition, before Prohibition, as long as human beings have been making alcohol, the government's been trying to tax it, and people making it have been trying to avoid taxes. So this designation, while generally good for the producer and good for the consumer, also good for the government because more revenue. Taxes aren't necessarily bad. Actually, a lot of the taxes from bourbon distilling in Kentucky go to Kentucky infrastructure. So if you live in Kentucky, that's good. But the government's got to have their eyes on it. It has to be aged in a bonded warehouse. This is a warehouse that government has control over, or oversight. That. They have their eyes on it. Fourth, this product, a bonded product, has to be aged at least 4 years. So, can't be aged 2 years, not 3 years, not 3.5, at least 4. Can be aged longer than that, a lot longer than that. Henry McKenna is a bottled and bond product. It is aged 10 years at least. This Dickel aged 11 years. This Heaven Hill 6 years. This Old Tub probably 4 years, but at least 4. Number 5, the end product has to be bottled at 100 proof. Exactly, like 100 proof, which is good if you're a high proof guy, woman. You like the bourbons that pack a little wallop. 100 proof, it means you're going to get some big mouthfeel in there, decent amount of alcohol. You know, a lot of bourbon gets made at 80 proof, sold at 80 proof. I'm not really into that. It's pretty too chill. You know, when I want a whiskey, I want a whiskey. Dang it. 100 proof is good whiskey. Number 6, and this often gets forgotten if people are listing out what it means to be bottled and bond. It's that the label has to name the producer, has to name where it was produced, and if different, where it was bottled. So it can't be bottled and bond whiskey if it's not transparent about where it was distilled. So we can look at these bottles. Old Tub says, distilled and bottled, James Beam Distilling Co., Claremont, Kentucky. Cool. That's actually where it was. This Heaven Hill, distilled and bottled by Heaven Hill Distilleries, Inc., Louisville, Kentucky, and Bardstown. Cool. Yep, that's correct. Ooh, cheers. This George Dickel, Cascade Hollow, distilled and aged by Cascade Hollow in Tullahoma, Tennessee. Correct, that's where it was. Henry McKenna, distilled and bottled by Heaven Hill Distilleries. Boom. So, a lot of transparency required on the label, which we like. We like that. We like to know where our whiskey is coming from. 7th and finally, like bourbon, but not exactly the same as bourbon, for something to be bottled and bond, it has to be a product of the United States. It's United States legislation, so we only have oversight here. Our government does. So, you know, you're not going to find bottled and bond scotch. Not a thing. Now, while all of these regulations, and I'm sure you can understand now knowing the backstory and what the regulations are, they're to help be like, oh, okay, this is, at least it's bourbon. Like, it's 4-year-old, 100 proof bourbon, not mixed with crap, and I know who made it. Good. That's good stuff. Now, what the Bottled and Bond Act doesn't regulate, what it doesn't tell us, is what it will taste like, what the product will taste like. It'll taste like bourbon, but if you've had some bourbons, you know there's some variation within the flavor. So it doesn't tell us about flavor. And it actually, if something is bottled in bond, it doesn't mean it's necessarily bourbon, because we could have a rye that's bottled in bond. We could have a corn whiskey, like Mellow Corn from Heaven Hill. That's a bottled in bond corn whiskey. You can even have brandy, so aged spirits that are bottled in bond. And I can even say you can have a gin that is bottled in bond. Now, why do you need a bottled in bond gin when it's not aged? I don't know. But you can have it. There's actually one here in Milwaukee. So many spirits, many kinds, made in the United States could have the bottled in bond designation. And back to the flavor thing here, while all of this regulation is good for at least making sure people don't die, like big plus, you don't want to drink yourself 6 feet under here by drinking rectified whiskey. You might still get crap. Like, it's not been my experience to have a bottled in bond product that sucked, but the government doesn't regulate flavor. So if the distillation was not so good, like if people didn't really know what they were doing, maybe still safe, but not yummy, and then the aging took place in a relatively crappy warehouse with crappy wood, you could have a crappy bottled in bond whiskey. So it's not a guarantee of overall quality. It's a guarantee of process. Need some more whiskey. As we look at the bottled and bond process too. There's one other really kind of interesting thing. And it's, if we harken back to the idea that this only, or is the product of only one distillation season. So it's fall at Cascade Hollow Distilling. They're going to have to make enough and set it aside as bottled and bond, or put it in their bonded warehouse. They're going to have to make enough to be able to blend to accomplish the flavor profile they want. Meaning, like, a lot of these big producers, they blend their bourbons or their whiskeys, their barrels, in order to accomplish a flavor profile that's relatively consistent. We saw it for years and years in Heaven Hill with this 6-year-old white label. Tastes the same every time. Tastes dang good. They don't make it anymore. Bummer. But if you think about a small producer like New Riff, so New Riff's standard bourbon and rye are bottled and bond. They're not making anywhere close to what Heaven Hill does. So in their distillation season, they got to hope that there's not a big profile change between fall 2018 and spring 2019 if they're trying to release a relatively consistent product, which I think they are, but being a young distillery, I think they're probably also fine with variation. So it'll be interesting to see then, as their bottled and bond products evolve over the years, what does that flavor profile do? How does that change? All right, so let's bring this home. We're just going to wrap this up with a few takes. First, bottled and bond legislation, the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897, is incredibly important. This is widely regarded as the first consumer protection law. And we know the United States is crazy about consumer protection. Like, probably not as much as it should be in some cases, but in other cases, like, we'll make a law about everything so that you know what you're buying. Ingredients labels, nutrition facts, like, there's a general transparency in the marketplace now. And that started with the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897. And that was very important then, so you didn't drink yourself to death. Not because you drank too much, but because you drank bad crap. So today now, do we need the Bottled and Bond Act in 2020? Like, it was really, really helpful in 1897, but do we need it now? I'd say it's helpful now, but I don't think it's necessary now. Because, like, there is a mob that will destroy you if they feel they've been treated disequitably. So, social media now exists where you can get on YouTube or you can go check blogs and you can have, 5 or 500 reviews of the product that you're interested in buying right away. Like, you have access to it on your portable infinite information machine, your phone. Like, we carry these things with us, and we can know so much about products immediately that people could never know in 1897. So does a product need to be bottled in bond for me to know that it's, 100 proof, at least 4 years old from one producer? Not necessarily. Is it helpful? Because I can go right away like, oh, that's bottled in bond. Well, now I know at least some things about it. Yeah, it's helpful. Necessary? No, it's not. But it is cool. That's my final take, and that is, I like bottled in bond. I like the homage to the old. It's definitely a marketing tactic now. Like, it's a reference to something old, as bourbon tends to do. So many bourbons are called Old This and Old That, Old Tub, Old Overhalt, Old Fitzgerald. Like, it's a marketing tactic today, just like it was a marketing tactic back in 1897. Then it was like, hey, this is actually real whiskey. Today it's like, hey, we value tradition and doing things the right way. And, I think there's some respect that should be given to that. Because it is a little bit more of a pain in the glutes in today's production to make something that's bottled in bond. But you're sort of celebrating the initial victory that was won by Taylor and his squad. That was really a win for everybody in the moment. I mean, in marketing, really, too, if we think about it, it's about telling a story. And the bottled and bond story is one kind of worth telling. All right, so I'm just going to leave you now with, if you're interested in buying some widely available bottled and bond products, some of the ones you'll see around, none of these, unfortunately, but would be Evan Williams White Label. That's a bottled and bond. That's from Heaven Hill. These first 4 are all from Heaven Hill, actually. Evan Williams, Henry McKenna Single Barrel. To get that back out. This is bottled in bond. Not super widely available now, but you should be able to find it if you look around long enough. Price is inflating, though. That sucks. Rittenhouse Rye, that's another, again, Heaven Hill, 100 proof, 4-year-old rye. And then Mellow Corn, which I mentioned earlier. Now, Beam has some as well. Their rye, Old Overholt, they have a bottled and bond version of that. They've got the Old Tub, which I actually still see on shelves, so you may be able to find it. But then there's Jim Beam bonded, and then they have Old Grandad bonded. Old Grandad is their higher rye bourbon. They have a bonded version of that. I mentioned those New Riff products. Those are getting more widely distributed. They may not be in all lower 48 states, but keep an eye out. They're probably in a neighborhood near you, and they're probably headed your way soon if they're not in your state right now. And then finally, 1792 has a bottled and bond product that has become more widely distributed. That launched like 2 years ago, I think. Maybe 3, but it's always on the shelf in my grocery store right now. Bottled and bond. Hope you enjoyed that journey. If you like this video, get down and like the video, subscribe, comment, you know. Tune in to my channel Thursdays at 8 o'clock where I do a live stream, popping bottles and talking about all things whiskey news. Follow me on Instagram at Drew P. Whiskey. I go live a couple of times a week just to chat it up, see how y'all are doing, and share what I'm drinking on that particular night. Thanks for tuning in again. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you guys have a good week. Peace out. Remember to keep it neat.